there is a succession plan because Putin possibly doesn't want to die in office. And if he doesn't want to, then of course he has to have a cast iron guarantee that he's going to survive being out of power, unlike so many previous Russian leaders. But of course, we won't know what it is because as soon as that becomes clear, that in itself weakens Putin's grip on power. There's no question of it being either free or fair or, in fact, an election. So why apply this test? Elections imply some degree of choice. But as you heard in that quote from Neil Melvin just now, there isn't a choice. The supposed alternative candidates are people who endorse Putin and have been put in place as what's known in Russia as the systemic opposition. In other words, they're part of the system that supports power. This is in no way an election any more than it was during Soviet times when they were also called elections, but there was only one choice on the ballot paper.
In terms of how Putin respects the electoral process and the constitution in Russia, I mean, he's already been quite overt in changing it and bastardizing it. Because the first time that he was president, he then swapped with his prime minister, Medvedev, over because there's supposed to be term limits. And then he just decided, actually, do you know what? I'm getting rid of term limits. I'm just going to be president again and do it for a long time.
That's right. It's this curious Russian mixture of scrupulous adherence to the rules and also complete disregard for them. You just change the rules when you want to do something different. There was this swap between Putin and Medvedev in order to get around the fact that he couldn't have consecutive terms and then change the constitution so that you can reset your number of terms to zero and start all over again. It's just another element of how this is really just a performative process, which begs the question, of course, why is it exactly that Russia does this at all? And some Russia analysts think that it is important to be seen to be supported, as well as demanding support, actually demonstrating that the support is actually there. And that's why Russia is urging people to come out and vote, even though the result is predetermined.
So it's almost a performative thing, as in they want to be able to see how many people will vote in support of him and who and where they are in terms of identifying perhaps pockets of resistance.
Well, there is that. And speaking of resistance, it is interesting that there does seem to be a low-level coordinated campaign of people protesting very bravely against this election by, for example, pouring dye into the ballot boxes or setting fire to them. But overall, you still have to ask the question, why does Russia bother? Because now with online voting and electronic counting, there's absolutely no way, there's no reason for Russia simply not to adjust the totals to what it wants. As always, it's not who votes that counts, it who counts the votes. And that's the Russian system for you.
In that case, then, I mean, do we even know what genuine support there is or might be for Putin?
No, absolutely not. Once upon a time in other elections, you might possibly have seen election observers who've been able to report independently of what's really happening at a small selection of polling stations. Even that is long gone. We really will only see this fragmentary evidence of what people are really doing in these polling stations.
And in terms of opposition, you talk there about kind of sort of performative type or structural opposition, i.e. They're actually pretty supportive and they've been put there on purpose. There are other candidates on the ballot paper. They're almost sanctioned, if you like, by the state. In terms of people that have been a genuine threat, like Navalny, I mean, are we seeing, because there was an election planned for right now, are we linking that to the death of Navalny in terms of the timing, that he was out of the way before the elections happened?
There are a lot of different theories for why that particular date was chosen for doing away with Navalny. It's possibly less important that there was an election coming up than the theory that's been put forward by Navalny's own team, that there was a possible prisoner exchange being discussed between Russia and Germany and the United States, and Putin or those around him decided that actually they didn't want to let Navalny go. But none of it is particularly relevant for this performative process, as he put it, for the election. It doesn't really matter who is standing against Putin. There was a potential candidate who actually disagreed with Putin on policy, which is practically unheard of. Boris Nadezhdin was standing on an anti-war platform, saying Russia should not be waging its war against Ukraine. Naturally enough, he was excluded.
Now, in terms of his style, I mean, part of the reason that Putin has managed to last for 24 years and undoubtedly will be given at least one more term is because he has been ruthless in being able to demonstrate power. And that means people do not want to come up against him because they see how much power he holds and wields. But at some point, he's 71 years old. Like I say, he's been doing this for a quarter of a century. People must clock onto the fact that he is far nearer the end of his term than he is at the beginning. And power will begin to seep away. I mean, do we have any idea of what happens when that seepage starts? Is there a succession plan? I mean, what's your analysis?
I've no doubt at all that there is a succession plan because Putin possibly doesn't want to die in office. And if he doesn't want to, then of course he has to have a cast iron guarantee that he's going to survive being out of power, unlike so many previous Russian leaders. But of course, we won't know what it is because as soon as that becomes clear, that in itself weakens Putin's grip on power. For the time being, there's no indication that it is slipping at all. We've seen this crackdown on opposition, on any form of political protest that really stepped up just as Russia was starting to prepare to invade Ukraine. In the middle of 2021 onwards, you saw Russia moving from controlling the opposition to actually trying to wipe it out altogether, which is what makes these people that are standing against the election by making these protests in polling stations particularly brave because they know that the consequences for them personally are going to be dire.
Indeed, very, very brave indeed. Look, thanks